Today I'm going to give you a tutorial in Blender for these chains that I used, and also I'll walk you through the Photoshop edit as well. Alright, so I'm using Blender 2.83. So first thing, I'm just going to go to General, and I'm going to go ahead and press X and delete the cube. I'll go ahead and delete this light as well. I'll keep that camera. Alright, so I'm going to press Shift A to add a torus. I'll go ahead and go down to the settings here and make sure these segments go all the way down to about right here. So it's going to be 8 segments to make the chain. I'll put the minor segment to 8. I'll go ahead and increase the minor radius a little bit as well. All right, I'm going to press tab to go into the edit mode. So on the left, you can see that I switched to the edit mode. I'll press Z and go to wireframe. Press 7 on the number pad to go to a top down view. I'll make sure that my vertices are selected, and I'll select half of it. I'll right click and split. So now it's split. I can press G and move this around. So I'll press G and move this out one space. Now I'll select these vertices here, and then also select these by pressing Shift. Then I will go to Edge, Bridge Edge Loops, and it will create a bridge for the mesh. All right, I'll do the same thing on this side. And now we have this chain-like mesh. So I'll press tab to go back into the object mode. All right, so I'll select the torus, and I will go to the modifiers. I'll go ahead and select the array modifier. With this array modifier, I'll go into the relative offset and make sure that the chain is connected. Now that the chain is connected, I'll go ahead and press Shift A and add a plain axis empty. So what I'll do is I'll select the torus and go into the array, and the offset will need to be the empty. So I'll select the empty afterwards and press 90 on the number pad to make it perfectly 90 degrees. And now the chains are linked. All right, now with the torus selected, I will go into the modifier section, and this time I will put a curve. So I'll press Shift A to add a path. I'll go into edit mode by pressing tab and make sure that these are separated. So I'll just move these vertices up a little bit. So with this torus selected, I'll go into the modifier section, and I'll add this NURBS path to the torus. All right, so I'll go into the array and go into fit curve, and then the curve will be the NURBS path. All right, so now that we have all of that, we can select the path and go into edit mode, and then continue to build the chain for as long as we want. And it will continue to build. All right, so I'll make sure that the curve is below the array. Now, whenever you move the curve, the chain will go along with it. All right, so for the texture, I went ahead and went to cgtrader.com, and I just got this first one. And this is the texture that I use for the chains. So you just download those, and then you go to your Blender file, and you go ahead and go to append, then go to wherever you saved that. And I just appended the actual meshes. So these are the textures that I downloaded from the website. So I use this one for the chains. So I went ahead and went into shading, and I selected the chain, the torus, and made sure I was in object mode and selected the material that I had in the scene already. So this is the base of the chain that I started with. All right, so this is a little bit complicated at first, but after a little while, you can kind of figure out the settings. So I'll go ahead and go over to the file that I finished already. And these are the chains that I actually rendered. So my camera's here, so I have a light here, and also I have a light right here. They're just they're area lights, and these are the settings I used. All right, so I'll go ahead and show you the final shading that I did for the chains. So it's a little bit different from the base texture that came with that pack. I played with the color ramp a little bit, and I put the whites all the way down here. So I did play with the scale on the wave texture. I played with the noise a little bit, but I didn't do too much to that texture. So you can just download it and kind of see the settings that I used if you want to. But yeah, that's how I rendered it. I went ahead and went into Cycles Render Engine. I made the resolution 4000 by 5000 and compression 100%, 8 color depth, RGBA. A stands for alpha, because I don't want anything other than just the chains. And in order to make it transparent, you go into the render settings. So you can go into film and press transparent. So this is not transparent. So you would get the chains and the gray area. So select transparent, make sure that your render is in RGB alpha. I went ahead and rendered that just by going render image. You just go to image save as. After it's done, you can save it to your computer. All right, so I went ahead and cut the subject out of the image with the pen tool. And I went around really carefully and right click, make selection, and I did that by radius of 1. That's what I came up with. I went ahead and copied that. As you can see in this image, she is sitting on this bench. So I wanted to fix that right away. So in order to do that, I just have the subject in a smart object, and I go to filter, liquify. So I just use this to make it look like she's not sitting flat on a bench anymore. After I had this subject and I went ahead and put in my chain asset that we just made. And so I want the chain behind her and then coming out and in front of her. So I went ahead and masked away her foot here to make it look like it's behind and then going in front. So I just added a mask and carefully masked that out. All right, so with the chains, they are not matching the scene. So I want to match the sky and kind of the lights of the background. So in order to do that, I go down to adjustment layer, color balance adjustment layer, and I go ahead and clip that by pressing this button, and it will clip to that layer. I used +12 blue to give it a blue hue to match the scene better, and I also added a curves adjustment layer, clipped that to all the way down to the chains, and just gave it this little curve to kind of match the scene a little bit better. All right, so I went ahead and started to work on the subject first. So I noticed that she was a little bit too saturated for this image. So this image is dark at night and there aren't a lot of bright warm colors. That's going to be kind of where she is in the image. So I went ahead and added a hue and saturation adjustment layer and reduced that by 30 to kind of make it a little bit more realistic. So after that, I added a color balance adjustment layer, added +17 blue, curves adjustment layer. I went ahead and went down on this side to match the blacks in the scene. So it's important to match blacks. So for this, I just used a curves adjustment layer and went in the bottom here to match the scene a little bit. All right, so for this one, I just painted with a soft brush. I selected colors, especially in the sky, and lightly painted with a low flow. Then I reduced that opacity by 76%, and it kind of made the subject look like she's in the scene a little bit better. All right, so these are dodge and burn for skin retouching, and I have a whole video on how to do skin retouching, so I'm not going to go into depth on it. So I went ahead and retouched the skin with dodge and burn. But yeah, check that video out if you're interested. There's a lot of actions and helpful tips on there to do dodge and burn and frequency separation. All right, so this is something that I like to do. I wanted a little bit of a rim light on the subject, so I went ahead and selected the subject by pressing Control Command and over the subject layer thumbnail, and I added a new layer and press Control or Command and backspace to fill with black. So if it's opposite, it would be Alt or Option backspace. But yeah, just fill with black and double click layer. Check the layer mask hides effect and reduce the fill all the way. And then you can use these inner shadows to kind of play with different effects. So I already did that. I'm going to delete that and I'm going to go into this inner shadow right here. So this inner shadow, I have a distance of 11 pixels and a size of 16 pixels with screen blending mode 100% with this color. So that's going to give me this effect, and I'm able to mask that out. So if I didn't have a mask, it would be all over the image. And if I masked it, I can put it just in positions that I want it in. All right, so I did the same thing on this one, and I just made it a little bit more saturated with a bit of a different color with a color dodge blending mode on this one. Reduce the opacity with an orange color, and it kind of gave it a better effect. All right, so I like to use a lot of bloom in my images. So what I do for that, I just use a very soft brush, put that into screen blending mode on a new layer, and I just select the colors around here and kind of just paint where I think that I want that bloom. All right, so that's pretty much it for the subject. So I'm going to go all the way back down to the beginning of the edit. All right, so this is kind of gets a little complicated. I'll just redo this bottom one, and then I'll just continue to show you without having to redo it every time. I'll just show you what it is first. It's a more precise bloom effect. So I have this action. It's really kind of complicated to do the action. If you guys want me to show you how to do it, I will make a video on it. So just tell me in the comments if that's what you want. But it's a luminosity mask. All right, so I already did it, so I'm not gonna click it again, but this is the action. And what it does, it makes these masks right here. So what it does is, when you go over this mask and press Control or Command and select it, it is selecting only the highlights, and you can shift Control or Command and continue to add on to your selection. All right, so if you want to select something that's just the darkest parts of the image, you can do that. All right, so for this, I'm gonna go ahead and select the brightest parts of the image. So this is the brightest parts, right? And I'm gonna go ahead and with that selected, I will go into adjustment layers and I'll go to solid color. All right, so now I have this solid color in just the brightest areas. And you can change it to, you know, different colors. So that's the powerful part of solid color adjustment layer. So I'll just go with like that orange that we had already. And I will put that into screen blending mode. So I'll go ahead and duplicate that one time. And with the mask selected, I will go to filter, blur, Gaussian blur, and you can really make that bloom as large as you want to with blurring. So I'll go ahead and do 41%. I'll shift click to select everything and Control or Command G to put that into a group. And I'll put a mask on that group. I'll go ahead and press Control and Command I to invert that. And now I can paint a bloom that's really, really precise, you know, wherever I want to. And it's exactly the brightest areas. So it's really, really nice. So that's what these layers are. I'll just go through that and show you what I did there. All right, so this is just some glass assets that I took a picture of a while back, and I really like the glass in this image. So I just continued to build that. All right, so I wanted a bloom behind the subject to kind of separate her from the background a little bit better. So I just painted with white because I knew that I can just put a hue and saturation adjustment layer to clip it, and I did that. Reduce the lightness because it was pure white, so I needed some color in there. Put it to the color I want, make sure colorize is checked, and increase the saturation to give that bloom effect behind the subject to kind of separate. All right, so I went ahead and pressed Control or Command Alt or Option plus Shift plus E to merge everything that I did into a brand new layer. Right click, convert to smart object. I already did that. So after that, I went to filter and camera raw filter. And that is what I came up with here. So with this, I'm just gonna let you see what I did, and you can take a look at that. All right, so that's a good way to kind of bring the image together. So after that, I added a color balance adjustment layer, and I went into the shadows, added +6 blue and -1 to go into the cyans. I double click this layer. I press Alt or Option to separate these and took that out of the highlights. So I was messing with the shadows in the color balance adjustment layer, and I want to take that out of the highlights. So I did the same thing here, except this time I went into the highlights on this one. I went into the yellows by -8 and the reds by +3 and magentas by -2. So I went ahead and double clicked the layer, and this time I pressed Alt or Option to separate the arrows and took that out of the shadows. So it would only affect the highlights. All right, so here on the hair was a bit too rough. Sometimes with cameras, the JPEG artifacts can kind of be ruined as you edit. So in my opinion, this was a little rough for me. So I just kind of painted over it with a textured brush to kind of soften up the hair a little bit to make it look a little bit better, in my opinion. And with this, it's just a 50% gray layer. So in order to do that, I just Alt or Option plus the new layer. I went to soft light and fill with 50% gray. All right, so with that layer, I just used a white brush and painted in a bit of a highlight where I thought that line in her neck was a little distracting. So I kind of got rid of that. All right, I did the same thing, except this one is in overlay blending mode. And I just kind of did some highlights where I wanted it to pop out a little bit. So these hue and saturation adjustment layers are just for like this area that I brightened. The saturation was a little off. So I increased the saturation right here. And on this one, I lowered the lightness and reduced the saturation because this was kind of out of place right there. So I went ahead and tried to make it consistent there. I went ahead and compiled everything by pressing Control or Command Alt or Option plus Shift plus E, and I compiled that into a new layer. All right, so with this new layer selected, I went ahead and used my frequency separation action, and you can find a link for my frequency separation video with this action for free if you're interested in that. And I have a whole video on how to do skin retouching, so I won't go over that in this video. So this is what I came up with for the frequency separation. So just kind of make it a little bit more smooth, and the colors blend in a little bit better. All right, so with this selective color adjustment layer, I went into the blacks and I went +4 black and -5 yellow. So the opposite of yellow is going to be blue. +3 cyan, just to kind of give it this blue hue in the blacks all across, which is pretty powerful because you want the blacks to be super consistent for composites. So after that, I went ahead and I did a sharpen, and this is how I like to do sharpening. I just press Control, Command, Alt, or Option plus Shift plus E to compile everything into a new layer. Right click, convert to Smart Object, and I'll go ahead and duplicate that one time by pressing Control or Command J. I will take that off of the stack and go to the bottom one, filter, other, high pass. So for the bottom one, I like to do about 60, anywhere from like 50 to 60. It will do like really strong, deep sharpening. All right, so I'll go ahead and press OK. This one's gonna go to soft light. So these give you strengths, different strengths. So soft light's gonna be the most soft. The next one's gonna be overlay, then it's gonna be hard light, then it's gonna be linear light. And that's the order of how strong it will sharpen your image. So we're going to go with the softest one for the deepest sharpen. I'm going to go ahead and turn that way down to about like 20%. So with that, it's going to do like a really deep sharpen, but it's not too overwhelming. And I did the exact same thing, except this high pass, I went way down to 2. So for this high pass, I'm looking at the eyes and the face, just to kind of make it pop. So for this one, I went ahead and did the strongest one because it's so much lower. I went into linear light for it. And as you can see, it makes the face pop a lot more. And that's important because the face is pretty much the focal point every time for the most part. So you want the face to be real sharp. And all right, so for the very last part of each of my edits, I really like to use noise because it makes everything consistent. All these images have different noise levels. So for the noise, I just pressed Alt or Option plus New Layer tab at the bottom right. Went ahead and go to Soft Light, 50% gray, press OK, right click, Convert to Smart Object. Filter, noise, add noise. So for this image, I did about 30% for the noise on uniform. All right, guys, that is it for the edit. I hope that you guys could learn a little bit from that. If you guys have any questions, please let me know in the comments. I'll do my best to answer your questions. If you guys like this video, please give it a like and a share. If you're not already subscribed to my channel, please do so if you want free Photoshop assets and tutorials in the future. I'd very much appreciate that. And that's all I have for you guys. Have a good one.